The year is 2015. An expedition of American scientists departs for Bolivia to find a 300-year-old elder rumored to live in one of the caves. A local inhabitant, acting as their guide, shows them the cave. The Americans enter and find the old man sitting in a cage. The local young man opens it despite warnings that the elder is a vampire and that it's dangerous to approach him. However, sensing the approach of people, the elder breaks free from his confinement and attacks Dr. Fanning, biting him in the neck. Soldiers open fire while Dr. Jonas rushes to the injured man. Later, the man is taken to a hospital where Fanning regains consciousness and recovers very quickly. Moreover, he is convinced that they have found a cure for all the diseases in the world. Thus, the Noah Project is born. Time passes, and Agent Brad Wolgast begins to recruit subjects for the experiment, deciding to select them from those sentenced to death. Anthony Carter, convicted of murder, becomes one of them. Meanwhile, in the laboratory of the project, Dr. Nicole Sykes announces an outbreak of bird flu in China, which is very dangerous, spreads rapidly, and has no vaccine. Dr. Pett suggests going to level 4B, where Dr. Fanning is kept, whose body has gained immunity to all diseases. But the doctor himself has become a vampire. Dr. Pett's team develops a vaccine using Fanning's blood, conducting tests on the prisoners. Shona is one of the subjects. The girl was infected with many terrible diseases, but her body coped with everything because she is the youngest. But to confirm the theory, Pett needs to test the vaccine's effect on a child. He is sure that there will be no side effects on children, and their bodies will gain almost immortality. Nicole asks Agent Clark to find a child that no one will worry about. At the same time, Amy's mother dies from an overdose of illegal substances, and the girl is sent to foster care. Everything happens over the weekend, so no documents are drawn up for Amy, leaving this until Monday, which the agents of the Noah Project take advantage of. They come for the girl, but sensing something is wrong, she runs away. The agents have to grab the child in front of bystanders, raising questions. Brad apologizes to Amy, gradually gaining her trust. He tries to negotiate with Clark to cancel the operation, but he orders to deliver the child at any cost. For the first time, Brad begins to question the ethics of his work. At this time, Jonas goes down to Fanning and plays his favorite song, hoping to awaken his consciousness. Janitor Gray suddenly says he sees Fanning in his dreams, and he's not the only one. It's feeding time, and the prisoners eagerly drink the blood that's served to them. On the road, Amy notices a sign for an amusement park. Against orders, Brad stops and takes the child to relax. Amy sees a toy unicorn at a shooting range, and Brad shows her how to shoot. Amy wins the prize. During this time, Brad receives a call from his ex-wife. It's been 3 years since the death of their child. She wants to move on and asks him to consider coming back, but he's not ready. After the call, he attacks his partner and suggests a new route to Amy. This act causes a stir among the leadership of the Noah Project. Clark is ordered to find and neutralize Brad and bring Amy to the center. Meanwhile, in the laboratory, Carter is prepared for his first examination. A doctor enters, introducing himself as Fanning. Carter notices blood on his lips, and Fanning tells him that changes will soon occur. Carter jumps up in fear, only to realize that it was a dream. Brad stops at a cafe and hears a TV announcement about the search for a girl's kidnapper. He calls his wife, who suddenly addresses him by a different name and starts giving him medical advice. He realizes that Noah agents are already at her house. Brad suggests Amy surrender. If they do so, Amy will be shown on TV, and the Noah Project will have to abandon their plan. The agent approaches a police car. They are taken to a station, but there, Brad hears the duty officer report to the sheriff about a call from the Ministry of Defense and realizes their plan has failed. Amy retrieves a key to the handcuffs and frees Brad when Clark's team arrives at the station. The sheriff is first to die. Brad takes his weapon, shoots, and kills several soldiers. Suddenly, he finds himself face to face with Clark. The friends aim at each other, but neither can fire. Clark demands the girl be handed over, and Brad responds by shooting at a fire extinguisher. Using the confusion among Clark and his men to their advantage, the pair hijacks a police car and escapes, but Brad is wounded. While fleeing, Brad turns on the emergency lights, allowing his car to move unhindered. Soon, he spots a school bus ahead. He deceives the teachers, claiming Amy is a new student. They let the girl in, and she in turn lets the agent in through the back door. One of the school children tries to record them on a phone, but Brad takes it away. The pair manages to hide from their pursuers. Later, they steal an old car, but Brad's condition worsens, and he loses consciousness. Meanwhile, Clark learns about the phone taken from the school child and orders it to be tracked. He also also arranges for Brad's wife's phone to be tapped just as Amy calls her. Frightened, Amy believes Brad is dead. Lila gives her directions, and Amy reveals their location and manages to revive Brad. An angry Brad throws away the phone. Soon, the pair leaves the car and heads to a house through the forest. Suddenly, a siren sounds, and an armed woman appears. Meanwhile, Nicole shows Jonas the effect of Fanning's blood on a subject. An old fracture has completely healed. In the forest cabin, Lacey reveals she served with Brad and that he is one of the best negotiators. Suddenly, a siren goes off, but it's a false alarm. It's Lila, arriving to help her husband. Lacey promises to organize a border crossing, but she doubts it will stop the Noah project and suggests making the project's information public. Brad names the 12 subjects. Meanwhile, Clark's agents find the car Brad abandoned and interrogate the tow truck driver, who accidentally mentions Lacey's forest cabin. At the same time, Carter complains to Jonas about strange dreams, in which Fanning appears. In the evening, the janitors go down to the cells. One of them teases Shona, though Greg tries to stop him. He accidentally drops his phone behind the bars. Shona calmly allows him to retrieve it. While his partner laughs at Greg, Shona attacks him and drinks his blood. At this time, a siren goes off at the house in the forest. Lacey and Brad see the approaching agents and open fire. Lacey is seriously wounded. Brad realizes he cannot save Amy alone. He asks his wife to take the girl and then confronts Clark, but Amy breaks free and joins the agent as she promised not to abandon him. The pair are captured and taken in an armored van to the lab. There, scientists are trying to understand how Shona was able to drink the blood of the janitor, though she hadn't touched Greg before. Greg reveals that his partner teased her, but it was believed that the subjects lose their minds. Clark suggests putting Shona to sleep. Meanwhile, Amy throws a tantrum, demanding to see Agent Brad. Nicole orders to bring him to her. Simultaneously, Jonas notices that Fanning and Shona have stopped moving in their cells, refusing blood. They are telepathically communicating, with Fanning persuading her to act according to the plan, promising the world as a reward. Meanwhile, Brad sees a TV report about his arrest, now also accused of the sheriff's murder. Clark takes him to Amy, but on the way, Nicole explains to the agent that the girl is humanity's last hope and will be injected regardless. Brad reluctantly assists Nicole with the first injection, which Fanning immediately feels in the basement. Later, a nurse examines the girl, and Brad manages to steal a syringe with a sedative from her cart. Amy learns the entry lock code and hears a voice from a neighbor named Carter. Brad tells her to rest, and he lies down on his bed, only to be woken by Greg in the room, warning that Fanning will come for Amy. Later, Brad encounters Carter in the corridor, who confesses that Fanning often enters his mind. Agents take Brad away, but Amy finds a way to communicate with her neighbor by writing him a note. Carter responds. Meanwhile, Lila begins searching for information about the death row inmates named by Brad. No one wants to talk, but she learns that Shona was taken by federal agents. In the laboratory, Clark confesses to Brad that he feels like he sees Shona's life story in his mind. Greg tells Jonas that Fanning talks to him almost every day, warning of impending work. Meanwhile, Lila shares her findings with a renowned journalist who agrees to verify her information. During the night, Brad manages to get out into the corridor. He catches Greg in the elevator, puts him to sleep, and opens the room where the test subjects are kept. Brad sees the terrible form of Fanning, but then Jonas enters the room. Brad is horrified because he was the one who brought all these people here. They drink blood and burn in the sun, which means that they've been turned into vampires. But Jonas insists on calling them virulence. Virulence. Jonas should just stick with what works. He's convinced that Fanning intends to break free. Meanwhile, the time comes to execute Shona. Clark orders gas to be released into her room and sees in his mind that her stepfather had been stealing the money she earned for her education and had been forcing her into intimacy from an early age. When Shona discovered that her mother knew all along, she killed both of them. Feeling the full horror the girl experienced, Clark cancels the execution. The next morning, Carter wakes up with a sunburn, realizing his transformation has begun. Amy senses his condition and fears the same thing will happen to her. At this time, Jonas is tracking the brain activity of the virulence. It turns out that Fanning's brain is functioning much more powerfully than the others. Brad is granted permission for walks, as the girl needs to get out. Meanwhile, Shona enters Clark's mind, warning him that one of the soldiers is starting to go insane. Clark is immediately informed about issues with a sergeant. He finds the sergeant at the cell of a serial killer, with the sergeant vividly describing all of his crimes. It appears a telepathic connection is formed between them, similar to the one between Clark and Shona. At this time, Brad and Amy are building a treehouse, using it to gather information about the layout of the complex. Clark deceives Nicole by telling her that the ministry canceled Shona's execution. Carter begins losing his teeth, which is the first sign of his transformation. Later, Amy asks a guard for binoculars, and the guard lets the child play with them, not suspecting that the girl is plotting an escape route. Meanwhile, the journalist releases an investigation into the disappearance of death row inmates. Nicole calls the ministry and learns about Clark's deception. Amy sees a sergeant with a rifle on the roof, firing at the guards. Carter is taken to the lab in an attempt to save him, while the sergeant demands a helicopter be provided to him. Clark sees Brad and Amy, and while his men provide cover, orders the pair to run. Amy astonishes the agents with her speed. The sergeant detonates the power station, cutting off power to the laboratory. Brad offers to conduct negotiations. Carter's condition worsens, and he once again sees Fanning. Brad goes up to the roof to talk with the sergeant. The sergeant admits that he has secured himself by sending a sample of Fanning's blood to someone who will create a scandal. Meanwhile, Lila and Lacey learn of the journalist's death and realize they won't be able to prove anything. Telepathically, Shona reaches out to Amy, encouraging her not to fear Fanning and showing her true face. Amy declares that she will not become like that. At this time, Brad admits to the sergeant that he has seen the virulence and knows who they are. Fanning enters his mind as well, indicating that time is running out. The sergeant starts talking about Clark's connection with Shona, but Clark appears and kills him. Carter regains consciousness and confirms that Fanning is controlling them. At this moment, he relives the death of his lover, for which he was wrongfully accused. Fanning offers him to become part of his family and rise to the top of the food chain. Then he lunges at a nurse and bites her. Jonas is pulled out, but his face is covered in blood, and it's unknown whose it is. The next day, the Deputy Minister of Defense, Gilder, arrives at the research center. Brad discovers that the cooks don't lock the back door of the dining room and plans to use this for their escape. At this time, Gilder orders the girl to be brought to him. Later, Nicole reports to Gilder about the telepathic connection between the subjects and demands that they be destroyed and the experiments ended. However, the Minister of Defense declares that the virulence are now needed as weapons. Unexpectedly, Dr. Pett shares his new ideas, and Gilder hands over the leadership of the project to him. At this time, Brad discovers that Amy can read his thoughts, but then Clark takes the girl away. Later, Greg locks Jonas in a separate cell and advises him not to look at Fanning. Meanwhile, Gilder has a conversation with Amy, during which Nicole arrives. Unexpectedly, the girl declares him bad. He becomes wary, wondering if Amy can read minds, but Nicole takes the child away and later removes her chip from the system, offering help with an escape. Suddenly, Brad finds himself in a telepathic simulation created by Cooper for himself. Cooper warns that Gilder has decided to turn Amy into a weapon against the virulence. Now, Amy will be the savior, and his task is to prepare her for this. Nicole hides Brad and Amy in a refrigerator while she acquires a key for them. Simultaneously, Dr. Pett starts an experiment on the serial killer Winston. Believing he has established a connection, he finds himself in Winston's telepathic simulation. Winston demonstrates his abilities, seemingly obeying the scientist. Pett decides to demonstrate this to Gilder, but Winston refuses to establish a connection. Meanwhile, Clark discovers Brad and Amy's disappearance, but Shona appears and reveals that they are hidden in the blood refrigerator. Just at that moment, a guard finds them, but Brad neutralizes them and the pair escapes. A frustrated Pett goes to Winston, who responds immediately, not waiting for the telepathic connection to be established, and proving that he is in control. The killer frees himself. Suddenly, the doctor sees his body under Winston's mental command, turning off the lights and opening the cell door. The next moment, the vampire catches up with Pett, drinks his blood, and enters the main corridor, where Brad and Amy happen to be. The monster lunges at the agent, and just as he is about to bite him, Amy screams so powerfully that she throws the vampire several meters away from the agent. Friends, if you're curious to see where the story's headed next, click on the link in front of you.